Before longships ruled the seas, before Odin and Thor were feared in battle cries, there lived a people shaped by forest, frost, and fire. Not yet Vikings, but born of the same flame. Bound by myth, blood, and survival, they forged the roots of a warrior people. Long before the world would know them as Vikings, their story began deep in the forests and plains of northern Europe. These were the early Germanic tribes, fierce tribal societies bound by a common language, warrior tradition, and belief in powerful unseen gods. They lived in small settlements, farming the land, hunting game, and fighting to protect their kin. Life was hard, but strength, loyalty, and honor were everything. Warriors carried decorated spears and round shields, and elders told stories by firelight of gods who shaped the world with chaos and might. Over the centuries, these tribes began to move north, pushed by population shifts, climate change, and conflict. Slowly, they entered the vast, cold lands of what we now call Scandinavia. Norway's rugged fjords, Sweden's dark forests, and Denmark's windswept coasts became their new home. Here, they adapted. They hunted elk in the snowy woods, built long houses from timber, and carved out new lives from the wilderness. Though the tribes were scattered, their shared myths and language, what we now call Proto-Norse, connected them. By 200 AD, these early settlers had laid the cultural and linguistic foundation of what would become the Norse peoples, the ancestors of the Vikings. Their journey had just begun. By the 3rd century, the scattered settlers of the north had grown into something more. From the wilds of Scandinavia, distinct Norse tribes began to take shape, rooted in the lands we now call Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. In Sweden's deep forests and lakes, clans farmed and hunted. In Norway, they lived between mountain and sea, learning to read the waves, and on Denmark's open plains, villages grew strong through trade and tradition. Though each tribe developed its own customs, they were united by language, Old Norse, and by their gods. They worshipped Odin, Thor, and Freya, offering prayers and sacrifices beneath sacred trees and stone altars. Runes were carved into stone, passing on knowledge. Elders taught stories of ancestors and gods, while young warriors trained with spear and axe. These were not yet Vikings, but the Norse identity was forming, a people shaped by cold winds, dark woods, and shared belief. Their story was only just beginning. As the Norse tribes settled deeper into Scandinavia's mountains, forests, and fjords, their beliefs grew richer, shaped by the wild lands around them and the mysteries of life and death. In this world of shadow and storm, gods rose to power, figures both divine and flawed, who mirrored the lives of those who worshipped them. Odin, the one-eyed wanderer, sought wisdom at any cost. Thor, the thunderer, defended the realm with his mighty hammer. Freya, goddess of beauty and battle, wept golden tears, and Loki, the trickster, danced between order and chaos. These were not distant deities, but companions in myth, watchful in the storm clouds, present in the crackle of fire and the howl of wolves. Runes, etched into stone and bone, became sacred tools of knowledge and fate. Each symbol carried meaning, power, and a whisper of the divine. Rituals took place in sacred groves under moonlight. Offerings of food, bone, and blood were made beneath ancient trees and before carved idols. Seers spoke of omens and dreams, and warriors prayed for strength before battle. This age of gods and symbols marked the spiritual awakening of the Norse world. It was not yet the Viking age, but the myths that would drive it had already taken root in fire, stone, and story. As belief in gods and runes deepened, so too did the bonds and rivalries between Norse tribes. Across the cold lands of Scandinavia, unity gave way to division. Clans formed around chieftains, strong men who ruled through bravery, bloodlines, and brute force. Petty kingdoms rose and fell like winter storms, each one seeking dominance over land, resources, and honor. Warriors became symbols of power. Their status was not measured in gold, but in the glory of victory and the strength of loyalty. Feuds were settled by blade and fire, oaths were sworn by the gods and broken at great peril. Long houses turned into fortified halls. Hilltops became strongholds. Wooden palisades rose around villages as raids between rival clans became common. The Norse world had become a landscape of shifting alliances, blood feuds, and ambition. Yet through it all, the core beliefs endured. Runes were still carved, gods were still honored, but now strength and leadership were everything. In this harsh world, honor was life, and shame was worse than death. The seeds of the Viking Age had been planted. What began as shared faith and myth had now become a culture of warriors and warlords. As the Norse chieftains battled on land, another revolution was quietly taking shape along the coasts and fjords. In the cold harbors of Norway, the icy bays of Sweden, and the stormy shores of Denmark, the sea called to the people. The forests gave them timber. The gods gave them purpose. And from this union, something powerful emerged: the longship. Long, narrow, and swift, these early vessels were unlike anything the world had seen. Built for speed and flexibility, they could slice through ocean waves or glide silently up narrow rivers. Shallow drafts let them land on any coast, raid, trade, or retreat in moments. The sea became a highway and a battlefield. Boys learned to row before they could read. Sailors read the sky like a map. Communities once bound by forest trails were now linked by ocean paths. These were not yet the warships of Viking legend, but the spirit was already there. Exploration, survival, and ambition. The Norse were no longer just people of the land. They were becoming a people of the sea, and the world beyond their shores was within reach. By the dawn of the 7th century, the Norse gaze turned outward, not for war, but for trade. Along the frozen rivers of the Baltic and the wind-swept North Sea, Norse traders launched their ships with cargoes of fur, iron, and amber. In return, they brought back silver coins, colorful glass beads, silk from the east, and fine cloth unknown in the north. These journeys were long and treacherous, but they brought contact with kingdoms and cultures far beyond Scandinavia. Norse traders walked the markets of Frisia and Francia, visited Saxon ports, and glimpsed the rising power of Christian Europe. With each voyage came more than goods. They returned with stories of vast cities, strange gods, and churches filled with golden relics and guarded by prayer, not soldiers. The Norse world began to change. Long houses filled with foreign trinkets. Chiefs weighed silver instead of honor alone. Curiosity stirred, and with it, ambition. These peaceful encounters planted the seeds of something darker. The Norse now knew what waited across the sea. And when the time came, they would not come to trade. By the mid-700s, Norse society had hardened into order. Life was shaped by rank, duty, and the ever-present weight of honor. At the top stood the Jarls, nobles who ruled over land, commanded warriors, and upheld the gods' law. Beneath them were the carls, freemen, farmers, craftsmen, and traders. And at the bottom were the thralls, slaves, often taken in war or born to bondage, whose lives were owned by others. But in this world, status was earned as much as it was inherited. Young men trained with axe and shield, dreaming not of peace, but of glory. Strength in battle, loyalty to kin, and courage in the face of death. These were the marks of a man. Warriors swore oaths before the gods. Feasts echoed with songs of conquest. At the Thing, the law council, disputes were settled, alliances forged, and justice meted out in fire and blood. When words failed, blades spoke. Duels were sacred, the last defense of one's name and pride. This was no chaotic world. It was a world of rules. But rules written in sweat, sacrifice, and steel. In the Norse heart, to live with honor was to die without fear. By the mid-8th century, the Norse world was changing again. Land had become scarce. Clans outgrew their farms. Rival chiefs challenged one another for power and pride. Honor still ruled, but so did hunger. Sons of carls had no fields to inherit. Thralls dreamed of freedom. Jarls feared rebellion. And warriors, bound by oaths and restless blood, longed for something greater. The seas that once divided now seemed to promise escape and opportunity. Across the waves lay foreign coasts, rumored to be rich, soft, and unguarded. Warrior leaders, no longer content with feasting and law-giving, gathered crews. They sharpened blades, tested sails, and whispered of silver across the sea, not in trade, but in conquest. The ships were ready, the gods were watching, and the Norse were no longer waiting. The age of myth had ended. The age of raids was about to begin.